The Purple Line is a community podcast bringing you in-depth conversations with diverse leaders in the public and private sectors. Whether you're a student looking to gather advice or a professional tuning in for valuable resources, our dynamic programming provides tips for all ages and backgrounds. I'm your host, Keith Fernandez, and this is The Purple Line. Jeff Holden has a 35-year broadcasting career, which began in Chicago radio and then later in Sacramento. Notable career highlights include launching Sacramento's first smooth jazz station, introducing Eddie Piolín Sotelo to a mass Hispanic market through Spanish language radio, and more. He joined Clear Channel Radio, now iHeartMedia, in 1998 in various local and regional management roles until 2012. He created New Sense Strategies in 2013, a company whose purpose is to empower opportunity by providing unique content development for a variety of disciplines, but primarily a platform for audio broadcast or podcast content production, helping people and businesses tell their stories in their words. Jeff is active in many community and professional organizations, among many other committees and advisory positions for nonprofit organizations. Jeff is married with 4 children and resides in Fair Oaks, California. He's a Chicago native and graduate of Northern Illinois University. He's an avid cyclist and is now an advocate for those experiencing the realities of a congenital heart condition known as Myocardial Bridge. We're honored to have Jeff on the podcast during American Heart Month. Jeff Holden, thanks so much for walking along the Purple Line. And as our listeners already heard and viewers on YouTube, you are one of the men who makes the magic of this podcast happen, and one of the industry veterans who we're lucky enough to work with for this year and the years beforehand. I think this is, really interesting because we often talk about folks who are, in the foreground. We've had Dina Siegel-Van recently in the AJC. We had Congresswoman Ross Lightning, Congressman Diaz-Balart. But there's a lot of work that goes into things, whether it's podcasts, whether it's policy positions, whether it's really just broad initiatives to help, the Hispanic community and people nationwide. And one of the things that I am thrilled to do here is be able to highlight folks who might not always be in the foreground. As someone who is in the foreground sometimes, I'm thrilled to be able to talk to you who makes the magic happen. So Jeff, first of all, welcome to the Purple Line, and thank you for taking the time to talk to us today.
Well, Keith, thank you so much. I'm humbled by comparison to the guests that you've had. So to be here just telling my story is not only, it's a pleasure for me, but to be coming from the hidden aspect of the podcast world into the foreground with the video and the audio is it's just an incredible honor for me to be here.
Well, we're honored by your presence, and we're going to get into your journey in just a second on your own podcast, Imperfect Heart. But first of all, wanted to have you tell our listeners and viewers a little bit about you. You're a 35-year broadcast and audio veteran. How'd you get into this business? How did you start your own businesses, which were pretty successful? And what led you to, become the successful businessman you are?
Well, I had been, as you mentioned, 35 years in the broadcast industry, started out in Chicago, moved to Dallas for an opportunity, moved to Sacramento for what was supposed to be a short-term opportunity.
Yeah.
And the company failed. So I got stuck in Sacramento, and it turned out to be a blessing in disguise. We've raised our kids here and have really, really enjoyed the community, gotten very, very involved. And, here I am 30 some years later, still in the community. I've lived here longer than anywhere else, and we have no intention of leaving. So that was my radio career per se in the community. And I did have a 5-year window where I actually was doing Spanish language media as well. And there's a character out there that some of you may know, Eddie Piolín Sotelo, who really got his launch in our little group here in Sacramento. So that was a lot of fun. We do have an association to the Hispanic community. I was very involved in the Hispanic community here with your president, as a matter of fact, when she was in Sacramento. And then from there, I had an opportunity to go to a much larger group of radio stations in the community. One was a big news talk station, KFBK, and we had 5 other stations underneath that on the FM side, of which they were at the time owned by a company called AM/FM. Then they were sold to a company called Clear Channel, and they became iHeartMedia. And then I left about 10 years ago and started this thing of producing shows on the stuff that you might have heard on weekend radio, the AM financial shows and, vitamin shows and things of that nature. And that kind of just morphed into podcasting. I mean, who knew? It was there, but all of a sudden we're realizing, hey, this production we're doing is the same thing for radio where you have to pay for it. And there's this podcast thing it's just exploding. Let's see where it goes. So we were doing a little bit of both, and now we've migrated. We don't do any radio programs any longer at all. They're all podcasts. That brings me up to today.
That's awesome. And tell us a little bit about Imperfect Heart. I know that it's a podcast near and dear to your interest and near and dear to your life. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, Imperfect Heart was not intentional in so many ways, as you'll hear in just a second. But what was happening is I'm a cyclist. I'm an avid cyclist and triathlete, and just I thought living a healthy lifestyle was the way to go. And if you do that, you live a long life and you stay healthier throughout the course of your life. And you eat well and you exercise and you do all those things. And I get a little carried away on the cycling side, but that's my passion for fitness. In July of 2021, I'm training for an event that's going to take place in the Sierras. And it's a 100+ mile event with a lot of climbing. So it requires a lot of training. And the event's supposed to take place. We're all there. We're ready to go. And what happens? But one of the fires breaks out. So, of course, the event gets canceled, unfortunately for all of us, because you're just amped up and ready to go. And so I figured, okay, well, I'll just find a couple of things around town, in the region and see what I can do from that. And after that training in July, it's early August, I get out and I'm riding. I feel this unbelievably weird sensation in the center of my chest when I'm riding. I'm like, that was weird. And I go out again. Now, keep in mind, this is happening when I start out, not afterwards.
Yeah.
And I feel it again. I think, well, I better keep an eye on that thing. So that's twice. The third time I go and it's like, well, that was like 5 minutes long. That stinks. It's getting in the way of my ride. By the fourth time, I'm like, something's probably not right. I'm going to have to get that taken care of. And then I rode one more time and I'm going out for 3-4 hours post that sensation. And on the fifth one, it was longer in duration. But what I noticed is that when I got home, the next couple of days, I felt, an inkling of it, not riding, just sitting around. So I figured, okay, probably about time to go to a doctor. So I go to my primary care physician and they do an EKG and they send me to the x-rays to get a chest x-ray and see how everything looks. And they go, well, everything looks pretty good. The EKG, it got a little bit of arrhythmia, but nothing that we're concerned about. It's not atypical for somebody who exercises with duration like you do. And I thought, okay. And that was on a Monday. We're a podcast studio, which I think we talked a little about, and that's how we produce the, Congressional Hispanic Leadership Institute shows. I had a guy come into the studio on Wednesday. Monday is my doctor's appointment. On Wednesday, this guy comes in, and I should say I also had my scheduled appointment for the cardiologist on Friday. Well, a cardiologist comes into the studio on Wednesday, and he happens to work at the hospital close to where we are. And I thought, this is good. I'm just going to pay attention. I don't want to ask a lot of questions because certainly there's nothing really wrong with me, but just in case. And so I pay attention, and really nice guy, and we hit it off, and we go through the podcast and think nothing of it. Well, Monday with the doctor, Wednesday with the cardiologist in the studio having nothing to do with me. Thursday, I wake up in the morning and I have that sensation again. I have it at 1 o'clock in the morning and it's pretty intense. I'm like, I'm not riding. What the heck is going on here? I remember my wife saying, can I rub your feet? And I'm like, that's not going to fix anything. It's way more important or serious than my feet. So we go back to sleep. It subsides. And at 5:30, it wakes me up with the intensity I've never felt before. And I break out in sweats. I've got nausea. I'm dropped to my knees in pain for a short period of time. And it starts to subside. But I tell my wife, I said, this is a heart attack. This is really what it's supposed to be like. I've got all the symptoms. Call 911. They show up, put an EKG on me. Sure enough, he says, you're having a heart attack. And he goes, we have an option of 2 hospitals. Which would you prefer? I said, I know where I want to go. Let's take me to Sutter Roseville, which is the hospital they took me to, which is the close one because that's where the cardiologist that I just met works. I show up in the ER, and by then the symptom had subsided. But when you have a heart attack, the heart produces these enzymes, and those enzymes are the heart muscle trying to heal itself as it's being starved for blood. And I had these enzymes at a high level. So they said, look, you're having a heart attack still. It doesn't, just because you don't feel it doesn't mean it's done. Because I thought, I think I'm feeling pretty good. You can let me out of here. I can go back. Yeah. And they go, no, we got to get somebody. I said, well, is Dr. Rishi Menon working? And I go, do you know him? I said, yes, he's my cardiologist. Rishi Menon was the guy that was in the studio just the day before. He shows up, he looks at me, he goes, what the heck are you doing here? And I said, I'm asking the same question. Let's just do what we've got to do. So they go through the process. They do a series of tests, not to bore everybody what they are, but anybody that's had a heart condition or a heart attack knows what that process is. And then they go in with an angiogram expecting that they're probably going to stent me and just fix whatever a blockage might be because something obviously happened. Well, they go in and they come out and I'm excited thinking, okay, good. It's a stent. We'll be out of here in a day or two and everything's good. He goes, there's nothing wrong. We don't see anything. And he goes, Jeff, we don't really know what caused it. So we're going to have to just go over time, treat it with some medication and see what happens. And over the course, that's now August 28th was the date of that heart attack. Now we go into September and October and they're testing and trying to identify what the condition was that caused it. And they don't have an explanation. Yet I'm still feeling these sensations and they're becoming more and more frequent. And in November, early November, one of those sensations comes on and it's really severe. And they had me on a monitor. It's a 24/7 monitor that you wear called a Holter monitor. And it triggers a message to the doctor and it says, I went into a thing called ventricular tachycardia, which means that the ventricle of the heart is beating extremely rapidly. If it goes into fibrillation, it stops pumping and you pass out and die if they don't get to you quickly enough. So that's serious. I come home. I was at the gym working out. I come home. He says, where are you? I said, I'm in the office. By then I'd showered up and gotten to the office. I said, I'm in the office. He goes, I need you to get to the hospital right now. And I'm like, okay, well, I'll finish. He goes, right now. So I get the message from the doctor that something's pretty serious, whatever it was that happened. And I said, okay, I'll hop in the car right now. He goes, no, you're not driving either. I go, whoa, I can't even drive. He goes, no, because if it repeats itself, you could pass out. And if you pass out driving, obviously it's a bad situation. So we go through some more tests. I meet with the electrophysiologist, and over the course of that next couple of days, they say, we don't know what you have other than the fact that we suspect you have a thing called vasospasms. And these spasms are constricting the coronary artery. And when the coronary artery constricts, it cuts off blood flow to the heart, hence an ischemic attack or what looks like and could be a heart attack. And if that lasts long enough, it gets more and more serious. So they can't diagnose that in Sacramento because it requires a specific type of testing, a specific type of chemical. And we just don't have the skill set in Sacramento to do it. So only a few hospitals across the country do it. Mayo Clinic and a clinic in Ohio.
Yeah.
And then, of course, Stanford. And they said, we need to see if we can get you into one of these hospitals for a diagnosis where they will provoke it through catheterization, measure everything, and then see what it is you've got. And sure enough, I was able to get in. Fortunately, we spent Thanksgiving that year in the hospital because my test was the next day after Thanksgiving. And they identified what was called severe vasospasms. And I have this thing called a myocardial bridge. And what that is, it's a birth defect. So when your heart's forming, in most cases, the artery, the coronary artery, which is the left anterior descending artery, the widowmaker, which you've probably heard of, goes over the heart. And that's your primary feed system for the heart's blood vessels. In the case of those of us with the birth defect, what happens is the heart muscle grows over the artery. And so the artery is embedded in the heart. And the heart squeezes when it pumps, and squeezes and constricts the artery. And so over time, in my case, 65 years, it got irritated enough to where it started to collapse, and then it started spasming in on its own. So the heart would squeeze it, it would squeeze, no blood to the heart.
Yeah.
And what was happening is, in more frequent occurrences, it was triggering this ventricular tachycardia. And obviously that's not good. So I had 4 or 5 episodes of that, including one in the hospital, which was great because finally somebody got to see what I was complaining about. And, from that point, they said, okay, there is a surgery to correct this. The surgery is relatively uncommon in the United States, and Stanford is the flagship by far in terms of understanding and testing, because they have a department that is just for myocardial bridging. So what they then do is schedule you for surgery. The doctor I have is one of the world leaders in this particular surgery. And at the time, he had done roughly 200 over the course of 10 years. And they open you up and they literally make an incision on the heart to flay open the muscle over the artery. And then it allows that artery to freely breathe, so to speak, and not be constricted. And so that's the unroofing procedure for people with a myocardial bridge, of which they're starting to find now that many more people may have the birth defect, and some just die. They have a heart attack. It looks like a heart attack. It looks like a coronary blockage. It's the, primary artery, the left anterior descending. And unfortunately, it's too late, and they don't even do an autopsy. So they don't really know that the person had that particular birth defect. So now there's a lot of research going on. There's a lot of study. And really the purpose of the podcast is to bring to light the reality of this affliction that many people have, or at least we think many more than typically, it was understood, and to bring the awareness to not only the cardiologists who don't accept the fact that these things are for real, they're supposedly benign, but it's really to say, yes, they are real. There's more people with the condition. And if you diagnose the condition and the symptoms are there, they may be eligible for this unroofing process, the surgery. And if you do that, you can at least mitigate a lot of the symptoms. Sometimes it's, there's other symptoms that are a result of it that are not correctable, they're irreparable, but you can at least get the pressure off of that artery. And, for me, fortunately, in my case, it has allowed me to return to what would look like my normal life.
Hey, Jeff, thank you so much for sharing that with us. I think it's really, I think a lot of times, many of us, myself included, don't really think about, health effects until they're too late. And I know that you mentioned you were an avid cyclist, and it was a big part of your life from, what I've gathered. How did it make you feel to have to sort of deal with this condition that was not well understood, impacted your life? I mean, not just, your exercise, but friends, family, etc. And how did you take all of this experience and either use it to rebalance your life or double down on the things that matter to you while you were navigating this very uncertain world and time?
Well, you probably can tell I'm a little slow on the uptake on some of this stuff. It took me 5 times to respond to something's really wrong. And your first inclination is denial. How could something be wrong? I'm in good shape. I've exercised, I've eaten well. Certainly can't be something wrong with me. So you get through the first phase of denial and you go through to the acceptance of, okay, something's wrong. I had a heart attack? No, I wouldn't even want to talk about it. I would explain it as well. It might have looked like a heart attack, but it wasn't really a heart attack. It was, just an issue with my heart. It was a heart attack. There is no other way around it. It had all the symptoms and all the makings and all the chemical, reality of a heart attack. So you go through that phase and then you start to realize, okay, something really is wrong. And we've got to go through the process and address it and identify it and talk about it. And the greatest news was identifying. After that provocative test in November, it was wonderful to know we know what this is now. What do we do about it? And because of the severity and the increase in duration of the things that were happening, it forced us to move relatively quickly. You can hang around for a while, but we're going to have you on a lot of medication. We're going to put you on a defibrillator. We might even have to insert a defibrillator. And those weren't very good options for me because they didn't address the root cause until we found out that, okay, there is something we can do. And then it's just the engagement. We made it a confirmation, set the confirmation date for the surgery, which I would have done it the next week if I could have. I had to wait because there were some vacations in there, and there was a holiday in between called Christmas and another one called New Year's. But on January 4th, as soon as everybody was back in the hospital, I was in. And so the surgery was on January 4th in 2022. So you go through that, immediate addressing of it. And of course, everybody Googles everything. We did all our homework. We talked to a lot of people. We talked to other cardiologists, of which some said, no, it's a benign condition. Just take the medication and the defibrillator. And I said, that doesn't seem like the best bet. And I'm talking to the guy that, cuts these hearts. And he says the majority of people come out of this with much better quality of life.
Yeah.
So it was an easy decision for me. And I was really fortunate in that because of the progression, I was able to get in quickly as well. So you have this circle of people who are your support network, and you have to share it. I mean, HIPAA be damned.
Yeah.
There's a value in people understanding it. And I will say too, I know many people who are listening to this have some semblance of faith. The support that was intangible as I was going into surgery was palpable. And I've had other minor maladies and small surgeries and things like that, but this is a life-threatening one. And I can tell you that going into that particular surgery, the feeling of support was something I've never felt before in my life. And it was because we did share it with people and we let everybody know. And, whether it was good karma or it was prayer or it was just positive energy, it was something I literally felt going in. I had no concerns whatsoever and came out of it on the other side with a successful surgery.
That's really encouraging to hear. And, one thing that sort of has stuck with me is you mentioned it took about 5 times to for you to take it seriously or to listen to your body, which is sort of what I would do too. I think both in the Hispanic community and sort of just as guys, sometimes, you're taught to walk it off and you go, oh, it's really nothing. It's got to be just this random pain. What would you tell folks who might be having a random pain and, just being like, oh, well, this is not a really big thing? I mean, the obvious advice is probably to go see a doctor, but what do you wish you had done differently?
Well, I don't know if I could have done anything differently because it would have been me and I still would have argued it.
Yeah.
My wife didn't find out until I had set the appointment, which means that it was after the 5th episode. She goes, I saw it pop up on the calendar. What are you going to the doctor for? Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry, babe. Let me explain to you what happened here.
Yeah.
But we know that just as guys and women too, especially if you are an athlete of some sort, you're very in tune with your body. When you hurt a knee or a toe or a foot or, anything is not right. The first thing is denial. It can't be. And I think not only guys, but you take that into the Hispanic realm, this is machismo, that it's not me. There's nothing wrong with me. And the incidence of heart disease in the Hispanic community is higher than it is in the general population. So the takeaway on that was don't wait, because you may not get a second chance. You may not get the opportunity to get back in, or if you do, it could be a severe enough heart attack that you can't recover fully from it. And there's a lot of sensation that I'll repeat just because even though we know it, but you could get, a tingling down the arm or a numbness. It could be chest pain. It could be heavy chest pain. A lot of people say that, it felt like an elephant was sitting on their chest. Mine wasn't. I literally only had that burning sensation. It could feel like, just gas, like upset stomach. But when you put some of these together and you add them up, that's significant. Something's going on. If you can add 2 or 3 of those, men and women, if you can add 2 or 3 of those sensations, then you need to get to a doctor right away. And if it happens and just goes away and only short-lived, even better to get to the doctor, because the next one could be the last time it happens. And that's my takeaway as well. When something doesn't feel right, yeah, once maybe, but if it happens again and it's very, very similar, deal with it.
That's exactly right. And I think to close this out, I mean, tell us a little bit more about the Imperfect Heart, what you're shining a spotlight on, where folks can listen to it, where they can find it. And it seems like you've had a pretty perfect recovery, despite the fact that the podcast is called Imperfect Heart.
Right. Well, the heart stays imperfect, unfortunately. It will never be right like a normal heart. And I had some other issues with the artery, so they had to correct that as well. But Imperfect Heart is the outgrowth of this. And it took me a while to figure out how I'm going to give back the gratitude that I've got and the overwhelming feelings of benefit. And how fortunate am I that I'm one of the people that gets to come back to what would look like normal. So Imperfect Heart is the outgrowth of that, to say we need to help other people in this same situation. Many people don't know what's wrong with them. Many people who do know they've got the bridge don't know what to do next. Many people have the bridge and the symptoms, but they're not sure what those symptoms look like by comparison to other people. And so as a result of a Facebook group called the Myocardial Bridge Support Group on Facebook, I realized there's way more people worldwide. I mean, we're communicating with people in Pakistan or Ireland or you name the country. They're all over the place. It's not just a United States issue. So it's to say there are other people like you. You're not alone. And let's talk about these things, share the symptoms so you can hear somebody saying, oh yeah, that's what happened to me. And you're experiencing it. Now you know you got to get something done. And then the process and the procedure. So we'll be talking to cardiologists and surgeons and people like myself who have a myocardial bridge, to just bring it to the forefront and help those people who do have it. And it became the podcast Imperfect Heart. And you can find it either at the website, myimperfectheart.com, or on any of the podcast apps.
That's great. I'll be sure to tune in. And this is a great reminder, not just to tune in to Imperfect Heart, but to get your checkup, to make sure that everything is shipshape. Too many of us, myself included, sadly ignore it too often. So just because you can run a few miles doesn't mean you are totally fine. So Jeff, thank you for sharing your story with us, for being part of the larger CHLI community, and for being, just someone whose story can inspire others and, hopefully ensure that folks know their health status, are safe, and are able to ensure that they are able to live their life to their fullest, whether they're confronting a malady or not. So thank you for walking with us on the Purple Line, and thank you for being such a huge part of the larger CHLI family and the CHLI team. Marianne, I know, has a great deal of respect for you and your friendship. So do I, and we're lucky that you are a part of every podcast, no matter the guest and no matter the date.
Well, Keith, thank you. It's my privilege, my honor, and I'm humbled to be here. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to The Purple Line. You can follow me at _Keith Fernandez on Twitter, and make sure to follow CHLI across all social media platforms at The CHLI for the latest updates.